After studying this module, you shall be able to know bias, its meaning and nature, know equivalence, its meaning and nature, one of the challenges in cross-cultural research is obtaining tests that can be utilized across culture. Since from the last modules, we have increasingly got sensitized with the fact that conception of constructs is different in different culture. Therefore, no test can be applied as it is to the other culture. For example, can we compare the average height of men in Chinese and American culture to the comparison of conformity in Chinese and American culture? Definitely no. In earlier case, length have common meaning, function and scale that can be used to compare people across different culture. However, in latter case, conformity is a construct that display non-equivalence in terms of meaning, function and scale that can be used to assess same construct in two cultures. Thus, psychological construct face the challenge, non-equivalence across cultures. The function attached to agreeable behavior in two culture, functional inequivalence and the meaning attached to the construct may differ in two contexts, conceptual inequivalence. Hence, during an assessment, factors such as meaning of construct, application of tests on behavior domains and nature of sample, literate versus illiterate, may hinder the true results of subjects' capacities. Thus, before one adapts the test according to another culture, a researcher has to examine the universal meaning that exists for a construct across culture. Indeed, in cross-cultural studies, dominantly structure-oriented studies and level-oriented studies are common that need serious scrutiny in terms of generalizability across culture. Structure-oriented studies focuses on the description of the meaning of construct that conveyed in different culture. Thus, features that are common and specific in the meaning about a construct is analyzed across different cultures. Schwartz in 1992 described commonality in the meanings of the constructs across 40 countries. Few constructs accounted to have common meaning were dimensions like conservatism, self-transcendence, intelligence, etc. Tanaka and Matsumiya and Marcella in 1976 observed cultural specific patterns in constructs of depression. Comparing Japanese with American on meaning attached to depression, Japanese displayed specific mood states in their descriptions, while American described common somatic symptoms. To explain the concept of depression, Dayal in 1984 observed across cultural variations in form of locus of control, ascribed for the success and failure of an individual. Thus, structural-oriented studies should carefully scrutinize over functional inequivalence and conceptual non-equivalence. In level-oriented studies, to combat with the issue of non-equivalence of tests, there can be two alternatives. A. We can construct equivalent tests that can be compared on various grounds like conceptual meaning of the construct, its application on the behavior domains and nature of samples. The items that share difference on the conception of construct can simply be discarded. B. The second alternative is favored by cultural and indigenous psychologists. Indeed, one category that we can introduce to describe the types of tests is comparability. On comparing the test across culture, the tests either exhibit equivalence or biasness in their responses. Thus, coming chapter will cover the meaning of concepts, types of equivalence and biasness, and how one can achieve equivalence while construction of the test. Notion of comparability. Vidya-mitra and Lewin in 1997 defined bias occurs if score differences on the indicators of a particular construct do not correspond to differences in the underlying trait or ability. Equivalence refers to the measurement level at which scores can be compared across cultures. As we can infer from the above definition, the two major aspects about a test is highlighted in definitions. 1. An equivalent test can indicate the differences and similarities about the constructs across culture in their test scores. Second, if the measuring instruments are unable to exhibit these variations through their test scores, they are formulating the biased opinion about the culture and cannot be applied to larger context. Thus, every test will range in equivalence and biasness in their test scores along the continuum. The test that shows high level of equivalence is more suitable in cross-cultural research than the tests that have high level of biasness inherent in them. In the following chapters, we will explore the kinds of equivalence and biasness existing at every stage or research. In deliberation, we will also identify the methods and technique by which we can increase the extent of equivalence and reduce the biasness. In our concluding comment, we will reflect on the possibility of achieving equivalence tests across cross-cultural psychology. Bias, meaning and nature. Definition. Bias in this context is the error that can minimize and confound the true results of the construct in the population. In cross-cultural research, the bias may originate while we apply standardized tests constructed in one culture to the other culture. For instance, of the subscales of MMPI test is homosexuality. That was constructed in the Western population. Within Western culture, it is unnatural for two people of the same gender to share any proximity. That is a sign of homosexuality. While in Eastern cultures, people of same sex, friends, can share a proximal relation by joining hands or giving a hug and showing attachment. If the test of homosexuality is applied in Eastern culture, the test will show high rate of homosexuality in this culture. Thus, the test is applied without realizing that the nature of sexual relationship across different culture. Such results exhibit bias against Eastern population. Therefore, we can infer from an example, though MMPI is internally consistent, reliable and valid test, nevertheless, while applying across borders, the test reflects biases for a culture. Indeed, the extent to which test will show biasness is purely dependent on the decision of the test taker. Correspondingly, it is difficult to compare two cultures that exhibit wide variations in their cultural norms, ideas and beliefs through a single test. Causes of biases. To understand the kind of biases, we will review few stages at which the test is constructed. Within each stage, we will review the causes of biases but will suggest remedies to overcome biases at each stage. Largely, two stages had been focused in the text theoretical stage and methodological stage. The last stage is analysis stage. This is covered in the last module of measurement in cross-cultural research. A. Biases in theoretical stage. The first stage of constructing the test is operationally defining the meaning of the construct. Two forms of issues can be observed at this stage. A. There can be a small number of statements under a particular domain of the construct. This is called construct underrepresentation, given by M. Burston in 1983. B. There is no indication of a domain, dimension, that represents the meaning of construct in a particular culture. This is called construct bias, by Vidya and Tanzer in 1993. Construct bias is the cause of bias that can create lack of equivalence across cultures. Therefore, to overcome such bias, one needs to include the statements of dimension or domain of many cultures. For instance, when we talk of moral development, studies reported Western culture emphasizes cognitive dimension of the moral development, while Eastern culture emphasizes emotional and spiritual dimension of the moral development. Consequently, if the standardized test should amalgamate each dimension, that he can avoid construct bias. Thus, few challenges that a researcher faces at the initial stage of constructing a standardized assessment tool for cross-cultural research pivots around theoretical conception of the construct to be studied. These challenges are identified as A. Differences in the definition of the construct across cultures. B. Differences in judging the appropriate behavior across culture. Sometimes, a behavior that is judged appropriate in one culture can be judged inappropriate in another culture. C. Number of items selected to assess the construct are sanity, hence the items are too few to assess the construct. D. Final challenge is when the test is unable to cover all the features of behavioral repertoire within the test. To overcome these issues, there can be few strategies that can be utilized. A. Since there is a variation in the definition and judgments of appropriate behavior, the researcher can either decenter or converge the instruments. Decentering is the process in which the researcher concurrently develops the same instrument in several cultures. For instance, Panzer, Glittler and Ellis in 1995 developed a test battery assessing intelligence and aptitude simultaneously across many cultures. After the test has been developed in two cultures, stimulus materials were modified in both tests. B. Another form of remedy suggested by Campbell in 1986 was convergence. In this method, instruments are developed in each culture and all instruments are administered in each culture. This seems to be a time-consuming and cumbersome method of assessment. 2. Biases in methodological stage. The second and major stage of research in testing involves methodology of accomplishing a research. During this stage, the researcher selects the sample, instrument for assessment and decides the mode of administration in carrying out the research. Thus, each step may create biases for cross-cultural research if not conducted cautiously. Let's begin with the first step. 1. Selection of sample. While choosing and assigning the samples, researchers have tendency to use non-probability sampling, convenience sampling. Because of constraints of working in an unknown population, as a result, the known population may have better sampling strategies, that is random sampling, than the unknown population. This results in confounded results, since the representative samples are not taken into account. Research also suggests that researchers tend to take college sample, since it is assumed that college students are matched on various parameters like educational qualifications and so on. However, this assumption that college students are comparable is invalid. Research indicates college shows variations in the motivational level, educational qualifications, achievements, abilities, attitudes in various subjects. Thus, they cannot be a representative sample. Two remedies suggested to deal with the sample biases are A. Bonig, Litz, Scherer and William in 2011 suggested goal of the research should guide the nature of sample. Homogeneous sample is suitable for assessing cross-cultural differences and heterogeneous sample is suitable for assessing cross-cultural similarity. B. The second remedy suggested relates to the problem of matching mentioned above. He and Widger in 2012 suggested if matching is hard to attain, that one can control those factors that generate sample bias. Example, if one is testing intelligence, one can attempt to control educational qualification by assessing his achievement, level of educational qualification, etc. 2. Selection of the instruments. Another important step after the selection of sample is the selection of an instrument. The instrument have three inbuilt characteristics that need due consideration. A. The nature of stimulus presented to the responder. B. The response style of responder. C. Nature of items. A. Nature of stimulus. We can observe a cross-cultural variability in nature of stimulus presented within the culture and response styles of the individuals within the culture. Such manifestation of bias within the instrument are called instrument bias, given by He and Widger in 2012. Nature of stimulus, while talking about the nature of stimulus, various features that can create cross-cultural variations are familiarity of the stimulus, complexity of the task, method of presentation. B. Verbal, non-verbal or computer-aided. And types of response procedures, multiple choice, long answer, short answer, etc. In one study conducted by Malda, Van de Bijger and Timane in 2011, they confirmed the influence of stimulus familiarity on the cognitive test of two cultures in South Africa. Therefore, it is always suggested to adapt the test before giving two localities. Nature of response. There are various types of response styles observed within the cultures. Cronbach in 1950 defined response styles as the tendency to use certain category of answering scale on some bias rather than the target construct. 1. Social desirable response bias. Individuals within few strata or culture are predisposed to answer the question that is preferred by the researcher or the culture they belong to. This implies that there are tendencies within the individual to give false reply only because they want to hide the true attitudes, as they are unacceptable in the societies they live in. This kind of response styles within the class or the culture can distort the true results of the culture. 2. Acquiescence bias. Individuals in culture may show tendency to agree or disagree with whatever is asked to them. Harzing in 2006, Smith and Fisher in 2008 reported that the probability of acquiescence is higher in lower socio-economic status from collectivist cultures. 3. Extreme response bias. Research also exhibit to use ends of a scale. 4. Reference. D. Nature of items. The third kind of bias originates from the process of selection of an item of a test. An item as it represents in measuring the construct within a test may indicate different meaning in various cultures, especially in verbal types of tests whereby the meanings of the items may be connoted in a different way across different cultures. These forms of biases may be generated due to various reasons like inappropriate and incorrect translation, distinct and unconnected item contents in several cultures. Sometimes an item can activate additional trait in another culture and may appear vague in a culture. For instance, certain words, for example, the Hindi word lajja, or such expressions may not be compared in a second language. Hence, translating items in two different languages is quite a challenge for the researcher. When applying the Marlowe-Crown social desirability scale in different cultures, the item "I never make a long trip without checking the safety of my car" does not apply to most college students in developing countries. As a result, this item introduces bias and endangers the comparison of scores at item level. Third, methods of administration. Another important consideration that a researcher should be aware is on the method of administration. In context of cross-cultural research, mode of administration plays a pivotal role in getting the true result. Mode of administration includes the techniques of data collection, sample size, format of instructions, rapport formation, and relation between the researcher and the participant. Few biases that can impede the mode of administration include vague or unclear instructions, language differences, banned themes, etc. At times, halo effect can act as a bias that can be acting as a barrier in facilitating interaction between administrator and respondents. The techniques of data collection that flows in continuum from direct, which is interview or face-to-face paper-pencil survey, to indirect, such as online survey, may show differential level of social desirability. The cross-cultural research using different techniques had shown that social desirability is least observed in online assessment, which is indirect method, given by Dwight and Flixen in 2000. The effects of the presence of interviewer were found remarkably different across varied culture. A study conducted by Davis and Silver in 2003 exposed that African American respondent shared fewer correct answers on political knowledge than the European American, when the interview technique of data collection was used to collect the data. Thus, these administration conditions can lead to biases, should be deliberated, be in the fieldwork. 4. Equivalence. After learning the different ways of biases that can affect cross-cultural research, let us learn various methods of combating these biases. The biases discussed above highlights the systematic error that one can create in cross-cultural research. In contrast, the classification of various types of equivalence highlights specifically the measurement level at which scores obtained in different cultural groups are compared. Van de Viger and Lewing in 1997 suggested that there are continuums of equivalence that can be catalogued according to the level of equivalence. The three levels of equivalence are construct equivalence, metric equivalence and full score equivalence. Construct equivalence. The lowest form of equivalence observed within these levels is construct equivalence. It focuses on the theoretical dimension of the construct. The two theoretical dimensions in the construct equivalences are conceptual equivalence and functional equivalence. Conceptual equivalence is observed when the similar meaning is attached to same behavior, given by Lohner in 1985, Malpass and Puertenga in 1986. Functional equivalence focuses on the function that is performed by the behaviors in the different cultures. There is a good possibility that the similar meaning is not attached to same behavior across culture, and the one behavior may perform different functions across various cultures. This creates the condition of conceptual and functional non-equivalence. Under these circumstances, it will be inappropriate to compare the set parameters cross-culturally. Thus, construct equivalences focuses to measure the same underlying construct across different cultures. For instance, two emic measures of attitudes towards counseling may tap different indicators of attitudes in each culture, and therefore the measures may include different items but at the same time be structurally equivalent. As they both measure the same dimensions of counseling, attitudes and predict help seeking. As they both measure the same dimensions of counseling attitudes and predict help seeking. Thus, construct equivalence considers the conceptual and functional equivalence in its due consideration. In process of creating construct equivalence, researchers faces measurement limitations. Though the items in different cultures are scaled down to measure same construct, but the items that are used to assess the same dimensions are different in different cultures. This creates a challenge to measure and compare the scores obtained from two different tests. Although it highlights the same construct across various cultures, yet statistically they belong to different set of populations of scores as obtained from different items in different tests. Therefore, it is the lowest level of equivalence. However, it is prerequisite for cross-cultural comparisons, given by Berry in 1969. For example, filial piety is a socially approved virtue, contains attributes of respecting, caring for and loving one's parents in most cultures. However, filial piety in the Chinese culture is broader and also involves obedience and unlimited responsibility to parents, which may account to taking care of parents when they grow old and needy, given by Dai and Dimon in 1998. To compare filial piety among Western and non-Western cultures, researchers should constrain the construct to the subfacets of filial piety that are recognized in all cultures and acknowledge that, in order to retain comparability, the construct is incompletely covered in one of the cultures. Metric equivalence. The second step to the ladder is metric equivalence. After creating the construct equivalence, the score obtained from the test are compared through metric equivalence. The measures of central tendency, variability are used to describe and compare the obtained results. The scores are represented through graphical representation and correlations in a simplest way to show some level of comparison observed in two samples. However, since they are not scaled down under similar unit of measurement, no inference can be drawn for the whole group. Thus, the last level of equivalence that is created includes full score equivalence. Third, full score equivalence, which is scalar equivalence. The highest level of equivalence is created through full score equivalence. Within full score equivalence, the obtained metric scores are scaled down under the umbrella of same normal probability distribution curve through standard scores like z-test or t-distribution, etc. This form of equivalence helps us to draw the inference about the larger population and make cross-cultural comparisons and generalizations. Thus, cross-cultural research insists in increasing equivalence and decreasing biases so that cross-cultural comparisons and generalization of those tests can be done. Summary. Indeed, in cross-cultural studies, dominantly structure-oriented studies and level-oriented studies are common that need serious scrutiny in terms of generalizability across cultures, given by Van de Viger and Leung in 1997. Bias in this context is the error that can minimize and confound the true results of the construct in the population. In cross-cultural research, the bias may originate when we apply standardized tests constructed in one culture to the other culture. In context of cross-cultural research, mode of administration plays a pivotal role in getting the true result. Mode of administration includes the technique of data collection, sample size, format of instructions, the rapport formation and relation between the researcher and the participant. Van de Viger and Leung in 1997 suggested that there are continuums of equivalence that can be catalogued according to the level of equivalence. The three levels of equivalence are construct equivalence, metric equivalence and full score equivalence.